The great meeting hall of Kepler Station hummed with sounds from dozens of different worlds. Strange clicks, musical tones, and electric buzzes filled the air as alien species talked to each other through their translation machines. Commander. Jake Morrison sat at the small human table, his face calm and quiet as he watched the other delegates. The Zealothi ambassador was talking again, waving 4 of his 6 arms in the air. His name was Vexstar, and he never missed a chance to make fun of humans. His translator box made his voice sound flat and cold. "Look at these humans and their silly stories," Vexstar said, his bug-like eyes gleaming. "They tell tales about warriors who fought gods. They speak of normal people who beat death itself. Such childish dreams from a species that can barely travel between stars." The other aliens in the room made sounds that meant they were laughing. The Corvan trade minister, a large lizard-like creature with yellow scales, hissed in amusement. The Nexari representative, who looked like a walking tree with too many branches, rustled his leaves in what passed for giggling among his kind. Even General Kethra, the famous war hero from the Altarian Empire, allowed herself a small smile. Her face was made of what looked like living crystal, and when she was amused, it changed color slightly. She had won more battles than any other commander in the galaxy, and everyone respected her opinion. Lieutenant Amy Richardson, who worked for Jake, leaned closer to him. "Sir, should we say something back to them?" Jake shook his head slowly. "Let them talk," he said quietly. His eyes stayed fixed on the big holographic display that showed star maps and trade routes. They'll learn soon enough. These same alien species had been arguing about the same things for hundreds of years. Who controlled which space lanes? Who could mine which asteroids? Who had the right to build colonies where? They had never faced a real enemy, never been tested by true danger. Dr. Helen Brooks sat at the far end of the human table, looking frustrated. She was a xenorchaeologist, which meant she studied the old things that alien civilizations had left behind. For months, she had been trying to tell the Galactic Council about her research into human mythology. She had found something strange and important, but nobody wanted to listen. "The humans think their old people wrestled with gods," the Corvan minister continued, his forked tongue flicking out as he spoke. "They believe normal men once stole fire from divine beings. They think ancient humans built towers to reach heaven itself. How foolish can one species be?" More laughter rippled through the chamber. The hive-minded Nexari made a sound like wind through leaves. The silicon-based Vorthan delegates created a noise like grinding stone that was their version of chuckling. Dr. Brooks had spent years collecting human myths and legends from Earth's databases. She had compared them with the oldest stories from other worlds, looking for patterns. What she found had shocked her. Many human legends contained information about star positions, mathematical concepts, and even descriptions of technology that shouldn't have existed when the stories were first told. The myth of Icarus flying too close to the sun contained surprisingly accurate data about solar radiation and atmospheric dynamics. The story of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods included details about fusion reactions that humans had only discovered in the last few centuries. The tale of Odysseus navigating by the stars matched star charts that were mathematically perfect, but when she had presented this research to the council, they had dismissed it as coincidence. Just pattern-seeking by a primitive species trying to make their old stories seem important. "Dr. Brooks," Jake said softly, "tell me again about the astronomical data in the Greek myths." Helen leaned forward, her eyes bright with excitement. "Commander, the story of Perseus and the constellation he was placed in contains star positions that are accurate to within decimal points. The myth of Andromeda describes a galaxy collision that our computers say will happen in exactly the time frame. The story predicts." "These aren't lucky guesses." Amy looked confused. "But how could ancient humans have known about galaxy collisions? They didn't even have telescopes." "That's exactly my point," Helen said. "Either our ancestors were incredibly lucky guessers, or these stories contain real information that was passed down through generations." Vexstar's voice rose above the general chatter. "The humans even believe their ancestors once fought wars in the heavens. They think normal people commanded armies. Of stars, they dream of mortals who could travel between dimensions. Such grand delusions from such a small species. General Kethra's crystal face shifted colors again, but this time it wasn't amusement. For just a moment her expression looked almost worried. But the moment passed quickly and she returned to her usual calm demeanor. What none of the beings in that chamber knew was that far out in the empty spaces between galaxies, something ancient was stirring. Old machines that had been sleeping for 1,000,000 years were slowly coming back to life. Sensors that had been dark since before any current civilization existed were beginning to detect movement in the void, on the edge of known space. Automated. Monitoring stations were picking up energy readings that didn't match anything in their databases. Strange signatures that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Signals that appeared to come from several different dimensions at the same time. The first signs had been subtle. A research station at the edge of Zeliphi space had reported strange readings before going silent. A covert mining operation had sent a confused message about impossible geometries before their transmissions cut out. A Nexari exploration ship had reported seeing ships that existed in multiple places at once, before vanishing completely, but the Galactic Council was too busy arguing about trade disputes to pay attention to these scattered reports. They were too focused on their own petty conflicts to notice that something vast and terrible was moving in the darkness between stars. Dr. Brooks had tried to warn them. Hidden in Earth's mythologies were stories about ancient enemies, cosmic threats that had once nearly destroyed all life in the galaxy. Every human culture had versions of these tales. The Greeks spoke of titans who had to be chained beneath the earth. The Norse told of the Ragnarok, when ancient evils would return to destroy the world. The Egyptians had stories of cosmic serpents that devoured reality itself, but when she had presented these findings, suggesting that human myths might contain warnings about real threats, the council had laughed even harder. The humans think. Their stories are prophecies, Vextar had said during one session. They believe their primitive tales contain warnings about the future. How can a species that still fights wars over water and land claim to know about cosmic dangers? Jake Morrison had listened to all of this with growing concern. Not because he believed the myths were literally true, but because he had learned to trust Dr. Brooks' research. She had a talent for finding patterns that others missed, for seeing connections that weren't obvious, and lately he had been receiving troubling reports from human colonies on the outer rim. Ships disappearing, colonies going dark. Strange energy. Readings that didn't match any known technology. The reports were scattered and incomplete, but they reminded him of something he had read in one of Helen's research papers. Dr. Brooks, he said now, as the alien laughter continued around them, what did those myths say about the signs that would appear before the ancient enemy returned? Helen's face went pale. Disappearances at the edge of known space. Reality. Distortions that couldn't be explained by known physics. Ships that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. Commander, those reports from the outer colonies... Before Jake could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The holographic displays flickered and changed, showing emergency signals. From across the galaxy, colony after colony was going dark, their last transmissions speaking of impossible things. The time for mockery was over. The ancient enemy had returned, and humanity's childish myths were about to become the galaxy's only hope for survival. 3 weeks after the first alarms rang through Kepler Station, Captain Lisa Turner stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force cruiser Defiant. The screens around her showed a map of the galaxy, but now large sections of it were marked in red. Those were the places where colonies had gone silent, where entire star systems had simply stopped responding to communication attempts. Captain, we're getting another distress signal, said Ensign Paul Martinez from his position at the communications station. His young face looked tired and worried. It's from the Zeliphi research station at Proxima Tertius. Lisa walked over to look at the signal data. The transmission was broken and full of static, but she could make out fragments of panicked voices speaking in the Zelathi language. Her translator was working overtime to make sense of the garbled words. Energy readings impossible, came one fragment. Ships that bend reality itself. Another piece said, matter being unmade at molecular level. The final clear words were, they exist in multiple dimensions at once. Then the signal cut out completely. Try to raise them again, Lisa ordered, but she already knew it was useless. Proxima Tertius was the third major installation to go dark this week. Each time, the last transmission spoke of things that shouldn't be possible according to known science. On the other side of the galaxy, Colonel Ryan Hayes was leading a team through what had once been the Corvin Industrial Complex at Rigel 7. The corridors around them looked wrong somehow, as if the walls existed at angles that hurt to look at. His team moved carefully, their weapons ready, but they weren't sure what they were looking for. "Sir, my scanner readings are going crazy," whispered Sergeant Monica Price. She was the team's technical specialist, and her instruments were supposed to be able to analyze any known technology. But right now, they were showing readings that made no sense. "The molecular structure of the walls is breaking down," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "It's like reality itself is being edited somehow. The matter here exists in multiple states at the same time." Ryan had seen a lot of strange things in his military career, but this was beyond anything in his experience. The shadows on the walls seemed to fall upward instead of down. When he dropped a coin to test the gravity, it fell sideways before suddenly snapping back to normal. The air itself felt thick and wrong. They found the Corvin survivors in a heavily shielded bunker deep in the complex. There were only 12 of them left out of the thousands who had worked at the facility. Their yellow scales had turned pale with fear, and their eyes held a look that Ryan had seen before in soldiers who had experienced too much horror. The translation software was having trouble with their panicked speech, but Ryan could make out enough to understand what they were saying. They spoke of beings that could walk through solid walls like they were made of air. They described weapons that turned living flesh into impossible geometric shapes. They talked about ships that existed in several places at once, making them impossible to target or fight. "They are the undoers," one of the survivors managed to say in broken galactic common. "The enemy from the old stories. The ones our ancestors feared above all else. We thought they were just myths. We were wrong." Back on Earth, Dr. Helen Brooks was working day and night in the archives, comparing the reports from the attacked colonies with the mythological databases she had spent years collecting. What she was finding made her hands shake as she typed. Her notes, every species in the galaxy had them. Stories about cosmic destroyers that existed before the current universe took its final shape. The Zelathi called them the First Darkness in their oldest texts. The Corvin archive spoke of the Unmakers, beings that could unravel the fabric of space itself. The Altarians had legends of the Void Shepherds, entities that herded civilizations toward extinction. But as Helen dug deeper into the comparative mythology, she realized something that made her blood run cold. Only human myths seemed to contain specific information about how to fight these entities. While other species had stories about running and hiding from the cosmic destroyers, human legends spoke of warriors who actually battled them and won. The Greek myth of Theseus navigating the labyrinth wasn't just about finding his way through a maze. It contained detailed instructions for moving through spaces where normal geometry didn't apply. The Norse story of Odin hanging himself from the world tree for 9 days described a meditation technique that could allow someone to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. The biblical account of David fighting Goliath wasn't just about a small person beating a giant. It contained mathematical formulas for calculating the weak points in beings that existed partially outside normal spacetime. The Egyptian myth of Ra's nightly journey through the underworld was actually a star chart showing safe passage through areas where reality itself was unstable. Helen's research was interrupted by an urgent message from the front lines. Colonel Hayes had found something at Rigel 7 that she needed to see immediately. The data transmission that followed contained sensor readings that matched descriptions from dozens of human myths with startling accuracy. Meanwhile, The combined fleet was assembling at emergency stations throughout the galaxy. Ships from every major species were coming together to face a threat that none of them truly understood. The Zelathi contributed their advanced energy weapons. The Corvan brought their heavy battlecruisers. The Nexari offered their ability to coordinate massive fleets through their hive mind, but as the reports kept coming in from the front lines, it became clear that none of their advanced technology was working. The enemy ships seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, making them impossible to target with conventional weapons. Their own weapons could unmake matter at the molecular level, turning the strongest armor into geometric puzzles that fell apart. Admiral Susan Clark, commanding the human fleet contingent, was reviewing the tactical reports when she received an urgent communication from Dr. Brooks. The scientist's face appeared on the screen, her eyes wide with excitement and fear. "Admiral, you need to see this," Helen said without preamble. "The enemy we're facing isn't new. They're the same beings that human myths have been warning about for thousands of years. And more importantly, our myths contain tactical information about how to fight them." Susan leaned forward in her chair. "What kind of tactical information?" "Weapons that can strike across dimensional barriers," Helen replied, pulling up holographic displays of ancient texts. "Navigation techniques for spaces where normal physics don't apply. Defensive strategies for fighting enemies that can manipulate causality itself." She showed Susan a side-by-side comparison of sensor readings from the destroyed colonies and descriptions from human mythology. The match was perfect. The demons that ancient humans had claimed to fight were identical to the entities now attacking the galaxy. "But Admiral," Helen continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "there's something else. According to the myths, humanity didn't just fight these beings. We won multiple times. The stories all say that humans were the ones who finally defeated the cosmic destroyers and sealed them away." Susan stared at the data in disbelief. "You're saying that ancient humans, with primitive technology, defeated an enemy that our most advanced weapons can't even scratch?" "I'm saying that maybe our ancestors weren't as primitive as we thought," Helen replied. "Or maybe primitive isn't the right word. Maybe they were just different. Maybe they had knowledge that we've forgotten." As if to emphasize her point, another alarm began blaring throughout the ship. 3 more colonies had gone silent in the past hour. The enemy was advancing faster now, moving toward the core worlds where billions of people lived. In the depths of space, the ancient enemy continued its advance. But for the first time in millennia, they were facing a species that remembered how to fight them. The question was whether humanity could remember in time to save not just themselves, but every living being in the galaxy. The myths had been dismissed as primitive stories. But now, as reality itself began to unravel around them, those same myths might be the only thing standing between civilization and complete destruction. The combined fleet stretched across the Vanguard Nebula like a metal forest floating in space. Over 10,000 ships from dozens of different worlds had come together to face the ancient enemy. It was the largest military force in the history of the galaxy, and everyone knew it might not be enough. Admiral Susan Clark stood on the bridge of the human heavy cruiser Valiant, watching the massive fleet through the viewports. Ships of every size and shape floated in organized formations. The sleek Zelathi energy vessels glowed with internal light. The massive Carven battle cruisers looked like flying mountains covered in weapons. The organic Nexari ships moved like living creatures through the void, but commanding all of these ships was General Kethra, the legendary Altarian war hero. For 300 years, she had been the greatest military mind in known space. Her crystal face and flowing robes made her look like a statue come to life, but her tactical genius was very real. She had united the warring Altarian clans, stopped the Corvan expansion wars, and created the peace treaties that held the galaxy together. Now she stood in the main command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the enemy's advance. Her crystal features, usually so calm and confident, showed something that no one had ever seen before. She looked uncertain, almost afraid. "Our best weapons are useless against them," she reported to the assembled fleet commanders. Her voice carried across the communication networks to every ship in the fleet. Their vessels exist in multiple dimensions at once. We cannot track them properly with our instruments. They strike from spaces we cannot enter. All of our technological advantages mean nothing. Captain Steve Anderson of the human destroyer Intrepid raised his hand. General, with respect, Dr. Brooks believes there might be other ways to fight them. Our mythological databases contain information that could help us develop new tactics. General Kethra S. crystal face changed color slightly, the way it did. When she was annoyed, Captain Anderson, myths are stories told by primitive civilizations. They are not military tactics. We need real solutions, not ancient fantasies. But even as she spoke, her voice lacked its usual confidence. The reports from the front lines were getting worse every hour. Entire star systems were being consumed by the enemy. Their reality-bending weapons were turning planets into geometric impossibilities. Nothing the combined fleet had tried so far had even slowed them down. That night, as the fleet prepared for what many believed would be their final battle, General Kethra made a decision that surprised everyone. She sent a private message to the human delegation, requesting an immediate meeting in her personal chambers. Admiral Clark, Commander Jake Morrison, and Dr. Helen Brooks arrived at the Altarian command ship an hour later. They had never been inside Kethra's private quarters before. The room was filled with soft, glowing crystals that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The walls were covered with what looked like memory storage devices, thousands of them arranged in complex patterns. General Kethra stood in the center of the room, her crystal form reflecting the light from the memory crystals around her. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she spoke words that would change everything the humans thought they knew about the galaxy. "There is something I must tell you," she said slowly. "Something my people have hidden for thousands of years. Something that will change how you understand your place in the universe." She gestured to the crystals around them, and they began to glow brighter. Images started to form in the light, showing scenes from the distant past. The humans watched in amazement as the crystals displayed memories that were older than any known civilization. "These are not just our records," Kethra continued. "They are archives from the first civilization, the one that existed before any of our current species developed intelligence, the one that fought the devourers in the ancient past and barely survived." The images in the crystals showed impossible sights. A galaxy-spanning civilization with technology that made current science look primitive. Cities that floated in space, without any visible support. Ships that could travel between dimensions as easily as flying through normal space. And at the center of it all, beings that looked remarkably familiar. "The first civilization was not Altarian," Kethra said, her voice heavy with the weight of ancient secrets. "It was not Zelathi or Corvan or Nexari. The beings who built that first great galactic empire were human. Your ancestors ruled the galaxy long before any of the rest of us even existed." The revelation hit the human delegates like a physical blow. Commander Morrison stepped forward, staring at the crystal images. "That's impossible. Human civilization is only a few thousand years old. We've barely been in space for a few centuries." "That is what your current civilization believes," Kethra replied. "But it is not the truth. The images you see here are real memories, preserved in Altarian crystal matrices for millions of years. Your ancestors were not primitive cave dwellers. They were the builders of the first galactic empire." Dr. Brooks was studying the images with growing excitement. The technology they're showing, the star charts, the mathematical formulas. They match the information hidden in our myths, every detail. "Yes," Kethra said, "because your myths are not fantasies. They are inherited memories, passed down through genetic coding from generation to generation. The stories you call legends are actually instruction manuals left by your ancestors to help you when the devourers returned." The crystal images shifted, showing the ancient war against the cosmic destroyers. Human fleets using weapons that seemed to bend reality itself. tactics that involve fighting on multiple dimensional planes simultaneously, strategies that required thinking in ways that defied normal logic. The Devourers nearly won, Kethra continued. They consumed entire sectors of the galaxy, turning whole civilizations into geometric impossibilities. But your ancestors developed ways to fight them. They created weapons that could strike across dimensional barriers. They learned to navigate spaces where normal physics did not apply. Admiral Clark found her voice. What happened to them? Why? Did they disappear? They didn't disappear, Kethra said sadly. They made a choice. After defeating the Devourers, they realized that their advanced technology could be detected and corrupted by the enemy when they eventually returned. So they chose to sacrifice their civilization to save the galaxy. The images showed the final days of the first civilization. Human leaders making the terrible decision to destroy their own advanced technology, cities being abandoned, knowledge being hidden in the only form the Devourers could not detect or corrupt. They encoded their tactical knowledge into myths and legends, Kethra explained. They designed your species to carry this information in your genetic memory, hidden as stories and cultural traditions. Then they deliberately reduced themselves to a primitive state, knowing that their descendants would eventually rediscover civilization and be ready when the Devourers returned. Commander Morrison stared at the images of his ancestors giving up everything to save the galaxy. The myths about heroes sacrificing themselves to save others. The stories about warriors who gave up their power to protect the innocent. They weren't just stories. They were memories, Dr. Brooks whispered. Genetic memories of the greatest sacrifice in galactic history. General Kethra S. crystal form seemed to dim slightly. My people have known this truth for millennia. We have been waiting for humanity to rediscover its true nature, waiting for the day when you would be ready to take up the burden your ancestors carried. She gestured to the tactical displays showing the enemy's advance. The Devourers are stronger now than they were before. They have had millions of years to prepare, but you carry the knowledge of how to fight them. Not just in your myths, but in your very nature. Our nature? Admiral Clark asked. Your willingness to sacrifice everything for abstract concepts. Like honor and duty, Kethra replied. Your ability to function in chaos when logical beings would freeze. Your tendency to charge into impossible odds without calculating the risks. These are not flaws. They are evolutionary advantages developed by your ancestors to fight an enemy that could predict and counter purely logical behavior. The room fell silent as the humans absorbed this revelation. They were not newcomers to the galaxy. They were its ancient guardians returning to face a threat their ancestors had defeated once before. The question now, General Kethra said, is whether you can remember how to be what you once were, whether you can unlock the tactical knowledge your ancestors hid in your myths and use it to save the galaxy once again. Outside, the enemy continued their advance toward the core worlds. But now, for the first time since the war began, there was hope. The galaxy's true defenders had finally awakened to their destiny. In the days after General Kethra S. revelation, Earth became the most important place in the galaxy. Scientists, military engineers, and researchers from dozens of worlds traveled to humanity's home planet. They worked alongside human experts to unlock the secrets hidden in the oldest stories ever told. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Murphy led the main research team at the underground facility beneath the Smithsonian Museum. He was a military engineer with advanced degrees in theoretical physics, but now he found himself studying ancient Greek myths and Norse legends like they were technical manuals. The story of Orpheus isn't just about a musician who went to the underworld, he explained to a group of alien scientists. Look at the mathematical patterns hidden in the lyrics he supposedly sang. They describe frequency harmonics that can create stable wormholes between dimensions. The Zealothy physicist Dex R studied the data with her compound eyes, her translation device working overtime. This is impossible according to our science. You cannot create dimensional pathways with sound frequencies. Maybe your science is incomplete, Don replied gently. He pulled up another holographic display. The Norse myth about the Bifrost Bridge contains the exact mathematical formulas needed to make it work. Rainbow light isn't just pretty colors. It's a description of how to bend electromagnetic spectrum across multiple dimensional planes. Dr. Helen Brooks worked with teams of linguists and computer specialists to decode more myths. Every story seemed to contain layers of hidden information. The tale of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods wasn't about a titan bringing flame to humans. It was a detailed technical manual for extracting energy directly from stellar cores. The Egyptian myth of Ra's journey through the underworld describes a propulsion system that we've never imagined, she told Admiral Clark during one of their daily briefings. It explains how to build ships that can draw power from the spaces between stars. Meanwhile, Captain Emma Foster worked with Altarian memory technicians to understand the combat applications of human myths. The crystalline beings could store and process information in ways that organic minds couldn't match, making them perfect partners for analyzing the complex tactical data. The story of Achilles and his invulnerability, Emma said, pointing to equations that scrolled across holographic screens. It's not about magical protection. It's a description of defensive shields that can redistribute incoming energy across multiple dimensional layers. The Altarian technician, a being called Zephyr, pulsed with understanding. The energy cannot destroy what exists in several places at once. Clever, very clever. But the most important discovery came when Dr. Brooks analyzed the legends of King Arthur and his knights. She had been studying the stories for weeks when she suddenly realized what she was looking at. The round table wasn't furniture, she announced to the assembled research teams. It was a command interface, a technology that allowed human commanders to coordinate military operations across dimensional barriers. She showed them holographic reconstructions based on the mythological descriptions. The table was actually a complex control system that could link the minds of multiple operators. The knights weren't just warriors. They were pilots of specialized ships that could exist in multiple realities at the same time. Each knight represented a different type of vessel, Helen explained. Lancelot's ship could phase through solid matter. Gawain's vessel drew power from solar radiation across multiple dimensions. Percival's craft could navigate through areas where normal space-time didn't exist. The alien scientists watched in amazement as human engineers began building these impossible devices, working with technology from across the galaxy and blueprints hidden in ancient stories. They created weapons that violated every known law of physics. Dr. Murphy's team finished the first prototype of what the myths called Gungnir, Odin's spear. In the stories, it was a weapon that never missed its target. In reality, it was a quantum lance that could strike objects existing in parallel dimensions. The targeting system uses principles from the myth of Heimdall, Murphy explained as they tested the weapon. He could see across all 9 realms simultaneously. The spear uses the same multidimensional sensing technology to lock onto targets that exist in several realities at once. Captain Foster's team worked on defensive systems based on the myth of Thor's hammer. The story said that Mjolnir could only be lifted by someone worthy and that it always returned to Thor's hand. The reality was more practical but equally impressive. It's a gravity manipulator, she explained to General Kethra during a demonstration. The hammer isn't heavy. It controls local space-time around itself. When Thor threw it, he was actually creating a gravity well that pulled his enemies toward it. The assembled scientists watched as the prototype hammer created a localized distortion in space-time, bending light around itself and pulling objects from several meters away. But perhaps the most shocking discovery was made by a team studying the biblical account of David fighting Goliath. Dr. Sarah Kim, a quantum mathematician, had been analyzing the story when she noticed something unusual about the description of David's sling. The 5 smooth stones aren't just ammunition, she announced. They represent 5 different quantum states. David didn't just hit Goliath in one place. He hit him in 5 different dimensions simultaneously. The implications were staggering. The ancient humans hadn't just known about parallel dimensions. They had developed weapons that could attack targets across multiple realities at once. As word of these discoveries spread through the combined fleet, morale began to improve for the first time since the war started. The impossible was becoming possible. Weapons that could harm the Devourers were taking shape in laboratories across human space. But the most crucial element wasn't technological, it was tactical. The myths didn't just describe weapons, they explained how to use them against an enemy that existed partially outside normal space-time. General Kethra found herself studying human military history with new understanding. The seemingly reckless way humans charged into battle, their willingness to sacrifice everything for ideas like honor and freedom, their ability to keep fighting even when logic said they should surrender. These aren't character flaws, she told her staff officers, they're strategic advantages. The Devourers operate on pure logic. They can predict and counter rational behavior, but they cannot understand or anticipate actions based on emotion and instinct. She pulled up battle records from human conflicts throughout history. Look at their tactics. They fight in ways that seem random and chaotic, but there are patterns. Patterns that the Devourers will not be able to analyze or predict. The alien commanders began to understand why their advanced technology had failed against the Devourers, while human myths contained the keys to victory. Logic and advanced science could be understood and countered. But courage, sacrifice, and the willingness to fight for abstract ideals were forces that the cosmic destroyers had never learned to combat. As the combined fleet prepared for the final battle, human vessels underwent modifications based on mythological blueprints. The destroyer Courage received weapon systems based on the legend of Perseus and his mirrored shield. The cruiser Honor was equipped with navigation systems derived from the myth of Theseus and the Labyrinth, but the most important modification was made to the human crews themselves. Using meditation techniques hidden in the story of Odin's sacrifice, human pilots learned to perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. Following patterns from the myth of Orpheus, they practiced moving through spaces where normal physics didn't apply. We are not just rebuilding weapons, Admiral Clark told her captains during the final briefing. We are remembering how to be what our ancestors were, warriors who could fight gods and win. The alien members of the combined fleet watched in wonder as humanity transformed before their eyes. The species they had mocked as primitive was revealing itself to be something far more dangerous. The galaxy's ancient guardians were awakening, and the Devourers were about to discover why their ancestors had feared the human race above all others. The final battle was coming, and for the first time since the war began, the forces of life had weapons that could strike back at the cosmic destroyers. The final battle began at the Kepler Expanse, where the Devourers had gathered their forces for an assault on the galactic core. The combined fleet faced an enemy that had consumed entire civilizations, but now they carried weapons forged from humanity's oldest stories. Captain Linda Barnes commanded the lead assault group from her ship Aurora. The vessel had been modified with systems that existed in multiple dimensions at once, following blueprints hidden in the myth of the Flying Dutchman. As she gave the order to attack, her words echoed through the fleet communications. "Remember, we are not the first to fight this fight," she said, her voice calm despite the impossible odds. "We carry the courage of our ancestors who faced this darkness before us. Today we finish what they started." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Human pilots, guided by tactical knowledge from ancient myths, flew their ships through realms of existence that shouldn't have been possible to navigate. They used weapons that drew power from the spaces between realities, following targeting solutions that came from stories their ancestors had told around campfires thousands of years ago. Commander Jake Morrison led the main assault from the destroyer Courage. As enemy ships that bent reality around themselves appeared on his screens, he found himself thinking of old stories. The tale of Odysseus navigating between the sea monster Scylla and the whirlpool Charybdis gave him the pattern for moving through the Devourer's space-time distortions. "All ships, follow the Odyssey pattern," he commanded. Move like you're sailing between two deadly threats that can't be fought directly. Find the safe path through the middle. The human ships began to dance through the twisted space around the enemy fleet, where logical tactics would have sent them straight into the Devourer's reality-bending weapons. The mythic patterns taught them to move in ways that seemed random but followed deeper rules. The Devourers, for the first time in millions of years, encountered tactics they couldn't predict. Their ability to manipulate causality was countered by human strategies that seemed to operate on principles of story logic rather than mathematical certainty. When a Devourer ship tried to erase a human vessel from existence, the human pilot would respond with a maneuver inspired by heroes who had cheated death itself. Captain Emma Foster found herself using the Perseus Protocol as enemy vessels attacked her ship Defiance. The myth of Perseus fighting Medusa had taught the human engineers how to build sensors that could track enemies existing in multiple dimensions by looking at their reflections in normal spacetime. "I can see them," she reported to the fleet. "They think they're invisible because they exist in parallel dimensions, but their shadows still fall in our reality. Target the shadows, not the ships themselves." The alien members of the combined fleet watched in amazement as human tactics began to work. The Zealothy energy weapons, modified with frequencies from the Song of Orpheus, started to penetrate the Devourer's dimensional shields. The Corvin battle cruisers, equipped with gravity manipulators based on Thor's hammer, began to trap enemy ships and localize space-time distortions, but victory came at a terrible price. The mythic weapons that humanity had rebuilt drew their power from the life force of those who used them. The ancient stories had always emphasized that defeating cosmic evil required sacrifice, that heroes had to give up their normal lives to protect others one by one. The heroes of the combined fleet gave their lives to power weapons that could harm beings older than civilization itself. Captain Barnes was among the first to make the ultimate sacrifice, channeling her ship's entire crew through the Aurora's reality-splitting cannon to destroy a Devourer mothership. Her final transmission reached every ship in the fleet. For every human who ever looked at the stars and refused to be afraid, for every person of any species who chose to stand against the dark, we are the light that burns brightest just before dawn. The Aurora sacrifice created a chain reaction through the enemy formation. The Devourer mothership didn't just explode. It unraveled across multiple dimensions, taking several other enemy vessels with it as the fabric of space-time snapped back into normal configuration. General Kethra, commanding the battle from her flagship, watched the human sacrifices with growing understanding. "They're not just using the weapons," she told her staff. "They're becoming the weapons." The myths weren't just about tools. They were about transformation. She was right. As the battle continued, the human crews began to change. The meditation techniques from Odin's sacrifice allowed them to perceive multiple realities simultaneously. The navigation patterns from Theseus and the Labyrinth let them move through spaces where normal physics didn't apply. The courage patterns from David facing Goliath gave them the ability to strike at enemies that seemed infinitely more powerful, but each use of these abilities cost them something. The pilots who guided their ships through dimensional barriers aged years in minutes. The gunners who fired weapons that struck across parallel realities felt their life force drain away with each shot. The navigators who plotted courses through impossible space found their minds expanding beyond what human brains were meant to contain. Admiral Susan Clark, commanding the human fleet from the heavy cruiser Valiant, made the hardest decision of her military career. As the battle reached its climax and the largest Devourer vessels began to retreat toward the edge of known space, she realized that conventional victory wasn't enough. "All human vessels," she broadcast on an encrypted channel that only Earth ships could receive, "initiate the Prometheus Protocol." Full mythic conversion. Every human captain understood what she meant. The final pattern hidden in their ancestral stories. The ultimate sacrifice that Prometheus had made when he stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. Not just his freedom, but his very existence. chained to a rock for eternity so that mortals could have the power to survive, one by one. The human ships began to transform. Following patterns that existed only in their genetic memories, the vessels and their crews became something more than they had been. They became living myths, powered by the willingness of their crews to give up everything for the sake of others. The destroyer. Courage became a spear of pure energy that could pierce any defense. The cruiser Honor transformed into a shield that could protect entire star systems. The battleship Freedom became a sword that could cut through the barriers between dimensions. The Devourers, faced with enemies that no longer followed the laws of physics or logic, began to retreat. But the human fleet followed them, driving them back toward the void between galaxies. This time, the cosmic destroyers would not be allowed to simply disappear and wait for another opportunity. Commander Morrison, his body becoming translucent, as he poured his life force into his ship's transformation, spoke the final words of the battle. We are the Guardians. We are the Watchers in the dark. We are the light that never dies, even when we do. The last of the Devourers vanished into the space between realities, but this time they carried with them a message. Humanity's mythic warriors followed them into the void, becoming eternal guardians who would ensure the cosmic destroyers could never return. General Kethra stood alone on her bridge as the battlefield fell silent. Around her, the surviving ships of the combined fleet began the long journey home. The war was over, but the cost had been beyond imagining. Humanity had saved the galaxy, but in doing so, they had once again become myth. The heroes who had wielded the ancient weapons were gone, transformed into the stories that future generations would tell. Their sacrifice would be remembered in legends that would prepare the next generation for whatever cosmic threats awaited. In the dark spaces between stars, the galaxy was safe, but it would always need guardians. And somewhere in the void, human heroes continued their eternal watch, making sure that the darkness would never again threaten the light of civilization.